Hi, welcome back to another month of our movie reviews. I'm Danielle Findlay. I am the guest host here at FrankieSense, and I'm here with my lovely friend Brent Marchant.
Oh,
Hi, how are you?
how kind. Thank you. I'm doing well. Thank you.
Good. Welcome back. I'm so excited that I get to join you for another month of movie talk.
Yeah.
Let's
Always enjoy
go. Oh yeah,
it.
absolutely. But you know what? I'm going to introduce you first, okay?
Oh, thank you.
Brent Marchant is a film critic. He is an author of many books, and he's got some really exciting things on the go. So check out his website at brentmarchant.com, marchant.com.
Great. Thank you.
Perfect. No problem. Let's go. Let's move ahead.
Okay.
I'm so excited. What you got for us?
Okay. So this month, our first film is an action adventure hero film from the Marvel universe called Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Now, I tend to pick my action adventure films very carefully because so many of them are so cookie cutter and they become kind of stale. This one is really quite good. It's a what's known as an origin story in which you are first being introduced to the future superhero named Shang-Chi, who grew up in China and ended up had a very loving, compassionate, benevolent mother who taught him how to use his abilities for good and for the betterment of everybody around him. And unfortunately, she passed away, and he was left in the care of his father, who was a one-time person who was seeking greed and uh, tremendous control and power over people and things. And his mother had actually managed to tame his heart. But when she died, he started reverting to his old ways and he started projecting those feelings onto his son. And Shang-Chi was not happy with the fact that here was somebody who was raised to be benevolent and kind, who was now being taught to be an assassin. So when he received his first assignment, he escaped to San Francisco and went into hiding. And that's where he had been spending a number of his time. That's where the story picks up. And basically, he's working as a valet at a place parking cars, kind of well under his abilities and well under his skills. But basically, he ends up having his hand forced in terms of uh, being able to bring his powers forth to the surface. And he realizes that the one who has forced his hand through representatives is his father. And he has to go back to China to confront him to basically set things right. And it's in many ways kind of a coming of age story and uh, a story where one learns how to accept one's true nature, true self. And he discovers that, yes, indeed, it is possible for him to use his abilities the way his mother had originally taught him. So that's the gist of the story in terms of what he's going about in this film. And one of the things I liked about this movie is the fact that it's got a very sort of epic quality about it in terms of the places that they end up going to and the things that they end up doing. You end up meeting a lot of very interesting supporting characters. You end up seeing a land that's kind of like Shangri-La within China that's filled with mythical beasts and beautiful landscapes. And also there's a great degree of comic relief that's very judiciously placed throughout the way the story unfolds, much of it being carried out by a washed up actor played by Ben Kingsley. So it all combines to make for a really very enjoyable time at the movies. Even people who aren't necessarily big into the action adventure hero genre will probably enjoy this simply because it's such a beautifully told story. It's such a beautifully made film that they're likely to come out of, having had a good time, feeling very uplifted by the message that's involved. So I really recommend this one quite highly in terms of this genre, which, again, as I said, is something I tend to pick very carefully. Mm-hmm. The other thing I liked about it is that, again, this is an origin story. It's in some ways similar to the kinds of character introductions that were done with other Marvel characters like Captain Marvel and Black Panther. But honestly, of all three of those films, I think this one was the best handled in terms of, in terms of the way the story is presented, the way it's paced, the way it mixes humor and serious material. And I was surprised somewhat by that, because when I originally saw the trailer, this looked like a glorified Kung Fu movie.
Yeah.
And I was not really terribly impressed. So I kind of went to it, not expecting a lot, but came away from it really very pleasantly surprised.
Nice. Are you a Marvel fan? Just in general?
It kind of depends on the vehicle. Certain movies are better than others. The ones that attempt to do more with the story and attempt to do more with the material than just be live action versions of comic books.
Yes.
Those I care for. The ones that end up being, pretty much rote presentations of comic book material, I can live without.
Fair enough.
So, but the way they're all, the way all the movies in this universe, as they call it, are interconnected with one another. Sometimes you do have to see other films to completely, fully understand exactly what's going on in the one that you're watching currently. There's not a whole lot of that with this one, because it's an origin story where you're being introduced to this character for the first time. So there's not a lot of references to other films, other events, other happenings, which is good, because I really prefer it when a film can stand on its own and tell its story without having to make assumptions that the viewer has seen other material to be able to understand what's taking place.
Now, the main character, the main actor, I don't know that I've seen him before.
I think this is like one of his first major roles. Simu Liu, I believe his name is. I guess there was quite a fairly extensive casting call to fill this part, and he ended up, coming out on top. I believe that they wanted to go for a fresh face, somebody who was unknown, and that this film would allow whoever got cast to be using it as a stepping stone for future material. Certainly, future installments in the franchise. You're almost bound to see that for sure. And like I say, he managed to come out on top, and he's quite capable. He's he's got the right mix of being able to be the superhero, but also to not take himself quite so seriously, which is important, because that's kind of the way his character is written. And he manages to pull that off quite well. He's also been given a supporting player, a friend of his, who in the film is played by the actress Aquafina.
Oh, okay.
And she's terrific. I mean, she's kind of the kooky sidekick in some ways, but she's also going through her own process of self-discovery, because like the character who's parking cars in San Francisco, she's underperforming in her life as well, but she doesn't quite know what to replace it with yet. By tagging along with him, she gets an opportunity to discover her own self at the same time.
Is that mostly her role types? I only know her from Crazy Rich Asians, and she was that kooky sidekick in there as well.
No, she actually is quite.
Oh, wasn't she in?
She was also in The Farewell.
Yes.
And yes. Also she was in Ocean's 8.
Okay. Oh yeah.
So,
okay.
Yeah, so she has a pretty wide range, but in this case, she does the sidekick really well.
Good,
as she does here. So
okay, and it was on location in China.
That I'd have to verify. I know the location in San Francisco was on location, but yeah, it's I mean, some of it, as I say, takes place in sort of a mythical land, sort of like Shangri-La. And in that place, a lot of it's all done with CGI. So, obviously they can't really have a location to go to for that. So.
Fair enough. Okay, how many stars?
I give this one 4.
Oh, Perfect. Oh, I
Yeah,
like
really,
that.
my only criticism with it is the final sequence, the concluding third act, does go on a little longer than it probably should. I mean, they're certainly trying to give viewers the most bang for the buck with special effects, and that's good. I can understand that, but I was beginning to grow a little bit impatient with it, saying, "Okay,
Wrap it up.
wrap it up." I mean, this is getting to be the what I call the look ma no hand school of computer graphics. So
yeah. Okay, fair
but
enough.
otherwise, I really enjoyed it.
And it's playing in theaters right now, right?
Playing in theaters right now, and it's been a huge hit. It's been out for about I guess it's almost 4 weeks now, and it's been topping the box office just about every weekend. So
nice. Good.
Well worth it.
Okay, perfect. Let's move on.
Okay, in a very different vein, we have The Eyes of Tammy Faye, which is a film biopic about the life of Tammy Faye Baker, the televangelist who became sort of infamous for her emotional presentations on screen and her excessive use of makeup. But it tells it, yeah. It tells a story about how she went from very humble beginnings in Minnesota and ended up growing up to be quite famous and wealthy thanks to the partnership with her husband Jim, who started out sort of somewhat sincere in terms of what he was doing, but ended up following a path that was really driven more by greed and lining his own pockets than anything else. Yeah. And she was such a trusting soul from the time that she was a kid all the way throughout her life that carried over into her marriage and into her endeavors with her husband. And she sort of had a blind faith that she put in place in terms of what they were doing. And she sort of went along unquestioningly with what he did and ended up taking a very hard public fall as a result of it. So then it really became a case of how can she look to reestablish her credibility, find redemption, get back on top. And that's what this film does. It follows her all throughout the course of her life and through the various adventures and misadventures that she went through. It's interesting in the fact that when a lot of the scandals were breaking regarding her life and her story, she was very vilified by the media and by the public. And what this film does is it actually paints a much more sympathetic picture. In fact, in the fact that she allowed herself to be duped by giving into this blind faith in her husband. And, when you give away your power like that, well, that can have really serious ramifications. And this film shows that quite clearly. It's got absolutely stellar performances by Jessica Chastain as Tammy and by Andrew Garfield as her husband, Jim. They're both award-worthy performances.
Really?
Yeah, they really are. The film itself is basically pretty well handled, although there are some parts kind of in the middle where I felt it could have been maybe a little better focused. And there were also some times when, especially early on in the film, where Jim and Tammy Faye are being portrayed as being so saccharinely sweet that they almost begin to come across like caricatures instead of characters, which when I was watching it, I was saying, okay, like tone this down a little bit because nobody's really like this. I mean, it sort of stretched credibility a little bit. But overall, I mean, in terms of everything else, this is really a very well-made film, particularly when it comes to the performances. I mean, they're just super. So.
Well, when there's previously there was another The Eyes of Tammy Faye because I Google searched and all that kind of stuff because I wasn't able to watch it, and this is one I definitely want to see. How does it differ from the previous portrayals, or what did it bring to light that was different?
Well, the previous Eyes of Tammy Faye was a documentary, It was made, I believe, while she was still, I believe it was made while she was still alive. So it was giving you sort of the present day version of Tammy Faye at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas this is essentially the film biography narrative feature based on the documentary. So,
Gotcha.
naturally, whenever you're seeing a film biography that's made from a documentary or is made about a person's life, they do take some liberties with it in
Mm-hmm.
terms of coming up with the dialogue and the way the characters are portrayed. But I think they did a pretty fair job in this film in terms of the way she was depicted, and it really paints her in a rather different light, I think, than most people thought of. That it really you're seeing somebody who is having to experience a tremendous sense of public humiliation over the way things went down. That obviously, can't be terribly easy to endure, especially for somebody who was as emotionally fragile as she tended to be when it came to expressing her feelings. Because, she had a childhood with a mother who was rather strict, who was somewhat ashamed of her because she was a child from a previous marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And in those days, the stigma of divorce was so great that even having her around at any time was a reminder that her mother had experienced this very public disgrace as well, or what was considered a disgrace at the time. And she wouldn't even let Tammy Faye go into the church where she played the piano. So she was looking for love. She was looking for acceptance. And at one point early on in her life, she defied her mother's instructions and went into the church and had a religious experience where she found what she contended was, the love of Jesus coming to her. And because of that, it infused her with an outlook on life where she made it possible for herself to be able to virtually love everybody else. And that was reflected in the way that, she conducted herself on television and the way she would interview guests.
Mm-hmm.
And it even set her fellow televangelists sort of on their ear somewhat when she was starting to do things that kind of ran afoul of what they thought was considered proper for their programming and their network. There's one scene in particular where Tammy Faye interviews an AIDS victim, and the fact that there would be a gay person featured on a religious network in those days at all was just considered the height of blasphemy. And she was basically saying that, I'm sorry for your illness, but I love you in the same way that Jesus loves you and the way I love everybody else. And that was an attitude that permeated her character throughout the film. And as wonderful as that is, it also, enabled her to put on blinders to see things she didn't want to see. And that's where she got herself into trouble, as the film shows.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm really excited to see this one. As I mentioned to you when you told me that this was going to be one of the ones that you were going to speak about.
Are theaters open in Canada yet or no?
Ish. Like, because I'm small town. So I don't have anything. I probably could go into the city to see some movies. I know that there is some movie houses that are open, but we've got, especially in the province that I live in, we've got a really bad fourth wave. So our numbers, our healthcare has really been impacted. Our numbers are outrageous right now. So I haven't heard of any movie theaters being open right now.
The reason I was wondering about this film in particular is it is a Canadian-American co-production. So I would think that it would be one of the first ones to get into theaters up there because, there's the national connection involved.
Yeah, I would imagine in Toronto and Vancouver, especially, probably, they would have this movie, but I don't know about anything in Alberta, especially in Calgary, Edmonton, but it would just be Yeah, and I'm not sure that I'd want to go at this stage, just because of the state of our province right now with
Okay.
COVID. So, but I am looking forward to this one, and especially because of the characters and the actors that are involved. I really enjoyed them. So, and the story. You know, I was younger when Tammy Faye. I just remember her makeup, and I just remember Jim, and the television, and how they came to their demise. And so I'm really looking forward to getting a little bit more into her background and her life.
Well, the other thing that's interesting too is that I saw a video short that featured Jessica Chastain where she was interviewed, where she's talking about playing the role and how she prepared for it. And one of the things that she mentioned was the fact that at the time that this story was unfolding back in the mid to late 80s,
Yeah.
When Tammy Faye became kind of a walking punchline on all of the sketch comedy shows and so forth, they would portray her as, sitting in front of the camera and crying and having the mascara.
Exactly.
And she said that she had watched hours and hours and hours and hours of footage of Tammy Faye being interviewed on TV from that time. And she said not once in any of that footage did she see Tammy's mascara running on screen. Yeah. So it's interesting also in the fact that this kind of shows, the power of the media to create an impression and have it stick, especially one that isn't even true to begin with.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that the film is very careful to do is not to replicate that. I mean, they do have scenes of her crying on TV, because that did happen, but certainly none where, she's got these pools of mascara running down her face.
Yeah.
So I'm very appreciative of the accuracy that the film involved in trying to portray the character legitimately.
Nice. Excellent. Okay. How many stars?
I would give this probably 3.5 to 4.
Okay. Good. Yep. I kind of figured as much.
Yeah.
All right. Let's move on.
Okay. So the next film that we have is called Final Set. And sports films, as this one is, again, are not usually terribly high on my list, but this is a French film that tells the story of an aging tennis star who was considered a teen phenom when he was first starting out and then never quite lived up to his potential. He would always either choke or get eliminated from the tournaments early on. And now that he's approaching the end of his career, he's 38, he's run into physical ailments where his knee is giving him trouble. So he knows that his playing days are numbered at this point. And he's still very anxious to want to live up to that potential that he was originally told that he had. So he decides to take a stab at playing in the French Open, where he can qualify if he manages to get through a number of very preliminary rounds that will enable him to play. And everybody's discouraging of him, saying, don't embarrass yourself. He has a wife who is herself a former tennis player who is now a young mother. And she's saying, I want to go back to school and get my life back on track. I could really stand to have you around the house more to help me out. He also has a mother who is the owner of a very prestigious Paris tennis club, who is disappointed in the fact that her own flesh and blood didn't live up to his potential in terms of how it would impact, the success of her organization. So he's got a lot of things working against him. And also, constant criticism from the sports press saying, you're just nothing but a loser. Why are you wasting your time? But he's determined to make a comeback. And that's one of the things that he decides to make use of when he goes into the French Open tournament. While this is all going on, there's also a lot of media coverage being given to another young teenage phenom who is thought of as being very much like the way he was when he was younger. And there's the prospect that he may end up playing against him in one of the upcoming rounds. So he's essentially coming to terms with his own self, his own former self. And that, of course, raises the ghosts of his past and his personal demons, having to wrestle with those. So it presents a very comprehensive picture of this character. It's really more of a character study in many ways than it is, you know, an out and out sports film, even though there is sports footage in it and it's very well filmed. It's certainly the kind of movie that is very uplifting for anybody who feels like they may have let themselves down, that they may have let others down, in terms of trying to make a comeback while the time still permits. Mm-hmm. So this is a really surprisingly well-made film. I really didn't hear very much about it before it was released, but it is out now. It's in some theaters, and it's also available for streaming online. And it's a very well-made picture. I recommend it.
Kristen Scott Thomas, she was that's who I identified with. Tell me a little bit more about her character in this movie.
She's sort of kind of a mommy dearest light character in many ways. I mean, she's she's very critical of her son. She certainly wants to be loving and supportive, but by the same token, the fact that he never lived up to the potential that she thought that he had, there's always this look of disappointment in her eyes when she's looking upon him. And as he's coming to the end of his career, she's trying to be supportive by channeling him into ventures where he won't, quote unquote, embarrass himself. And she thinks she's doing the right thing. She thinks she's being thoughtful and considerate, but in many ways, she's also being very insulting by doing that, because she's constantly knocking down his willingness to try and live up to that potential while he still has the chance.
Yeah. You know what? This is probably much more common than we would even know, because the percentage of athletes who actually live to their fullest potential and are able to have that high achieving career is very slim. So I would imagine that this would be quite identifiable and relatable to a lot of individuals who, you know, had a focus, had a goal of being something that they didn't live up to their true potential. And then to have family, a mother, a father, whoever, a parental guidance who maybe was, had that same kind of role as Kristen Scott Thomas.
Yeah. It's a story that, I mean, it's set in a sports venue, but it could probably be just as applicable to anybody else who is involved in some kind of endeavor where they didn't live up to what was expected of them. Yeah. I mean, somebody who is an actor or a performer or a singer.
Fair enough.
I think the parallels there are very similar.
Yeah.
In this case, I think the sports venue is important in the fact that it shows just how draining living up to what's expected of you can be, not just mentally, but also physically and in terms of public reputation. I mean, when he starts experiencing some success in this film, he's really relishing it because he hasn't experienced this for a while. I mean, he ends up getting a corporate sponsor, which he hasn't had in some time. And, there's attention in the media saying, wow, I mean, this guy's really, surprising everybody for somebody who's this age. And in some ways, he's really not all that surprised himself, because during the course of the film, when he's receiving so much criticism from so many other people, he's constantly reminding them that, hey, I'm not dead. And there's plenty of other tennis stars who've had some of their greatest successes at ages older than I am.
Absolutely.
So why are you knocking me down when I'm sincerely trying to work at making a comeback here? And he doesn't get a whole lot of sympathy for that, which is, it's unfortunate, but in many ways, it also helps to steel his resolve that much further and to keep carrying on to achieve what he wants to achieve. So,
nice.
Yeah. And the tennis footage is really well shot. I mean, the use of different camera angles, the different use of slow motion and live action speed really do a good job of portraying those events. And also the fact that you don't really have to know a lot about tennis in order to be able to understand exactly what's going on here. I mean, it certainly helps, but I mean, it's not like you have to, be intricately familiar with the nature of the sport to understand what's taking place on screen. And for those who may be less familiar with it, they do an adequate job of explaining it, but without being too obvious in the course of doing so, which that's quite a skill too, to be able to sort of walk a tightrope of being informative without being condescending.
Are you familiar with Quentin Renaud?
No, this was the first I had heard of him. Now I believe he's made several short films, and this was, I believe, his debut feature. And I was very impressed. I mean, really a very, very capable job in terms of telling a story like this. And I like the fact also that the story in many ways is actually rather simple. It's not really trying to imbue the script and the story with all kinds of extraneous considerations and story threads. And it plays it pretty straightforward in terms of the way it's telling it. And that's good because, sometimes when you're doing a character study like this, simpler is often better.
Absolutely.
So I recommend this one highly. I give this one 4 stars.
Wow, that's good.
Yeah.
And considering that when you started, you said that you're not often drawn to, sport movie.
Yeah, I mean,
type.
A lot of them get to be kind of corny and kind of cliched and very cookie cutter. And this one, there are some elements of it that are a little bit predictable, but I like the fact that this was really focusing more on the individual than on the sport.
Yeah.
And probably some of that's attributable to the fact that when you're dealing with tennis, you're dealing with an individual sport as opposed to a team sport.
Absolutely.
So that makes it more possible to do that kind of a storyline, that kind of an approach to telling the picture, telling the story of the picture.
Nice.
So, yeah, so I recommend this one highly. It's in theaters, and it's also available for streaming online at this point.
Perfect. Okay, and 4 to 5 stars. I like that. Okay, and we got one more.
Okay. Now, carrying on with the sports theme, we have a documentary called The Ice King, which is a film about the life of the Olympic figure skater John Curry. And this was made in 2018, and it's available for streaming online, but it's also begun showing up in some special screenings, probably because the Winter Olympics are only a few months away at this point. So there's, it's kind of the build up and the run up to that they're featuring movies like this. It tells Curry's life story about how he was a figure skater growing up in Britain. And he had a very difficult upbringing. John was a very sensitive individual who really loved the arts and wanted to become a dancer. And his father, being very conservative and judgmental, did not want to pursue that because it wasn't seen as being manly enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
So John Curry ended up taking an interest in figure skating, and his father agreed to that. He was willing to go along with it because at least figure skating was a sport, and that was considered more acceptable at the time. This was in the late 60s and early to mid 70s. And once he was learning how to skate, Curry was very interested in bringing new dimensions to the sport that weren't there previously. Figure skating at that point on the men's side was considered to be basically driven by feats of athleticism, high flying jumps and big spins. And he wanted to make it more artistic. He wanted to make it more expressive. He wanted to bring in those dance oriented features that he wanted to study originally and incorporate them into the skating. Now, at the time, that was considered perfectly acceptable for women to do, but it was not considered again, widely proper for men to be doing. He was determined, however, to basically say, well, sports culture be damned. This is what I want to do. This is going to move the sport forward. It's going to make it more expressive. It's going to give it a wider range of possibilities for routines. And I'm going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And he did. And it ended up revolutionizing the sport in many ways. He also, once he finished competing, after winning the 1976 gold medal at the Winter Olympics and the World Championship, he ended up drawing upon that clout to start a skating troupe where the routines were based more on the kinds of things that he wanted to do to introduce into the sport. He was basically doing what could essentially be called ballet on ice in many ways. And he ended up having a number of fellow skaters who were very drawn to doing this kind of performing. They just flocked to him and saying, I want to be part of your troupe. I want to be part of your routines. So he ended up drawing the attention of the people like Jojo Starbuck and Dorothy Hamill, who were very willing to assist him in continuing to evolve the art form, and take it further. And he ended up having a very brief but flashy career in the early 80s, where he was able to introduce these things. But his troupe ran into financial difficulties, and Curry himself was also dealing with some personal issues. He had been prone to depression at times. And also, he was the first openly gay Olympian. He was sort of thrust into the public spotlight by a reporter who had outed him essentially in a way that he was not terribly happy with. But he didn't deny it once it became public knowledge either. So these things all kind of wore on him at the same time. And this was at the time when the AIDS crisis was first beginning to emerge. And unfortunately, he ended up contracting it and ended up passing away at age 44 in the 1994. So it clearly, shows a career that was kind of cut short in terms of how far it could develop and what things he could bring to the art form. But nevertheless, it's a very fitting tribute and to his legacy for helping to push the sport forward in ways that might not have happened were it not for his efforts to do that. And it's important to recognize, because a number of figure skaters who have followed him in subsequent years were very impressed and very influenced by what he was doing, and have since incorporated some of the qualities that he brought to the sport into their routines. People like Robin Cousins, who won the 1980 Winter Olympics gold medal, and Johnny Weir, who was a bronze medalist at the World Championships and 3 times American champion. They made it possible. He made it possible, essentially, to allow these people to be themselves, to be expressive in ways that they might not have been available to do so previously. And the film all brings that out and explores the things that he did, the person that he was, and it does so with a lot of archive footage involving interviews with Curry, as well as a lot of extremely rare footage of some of the routines that he did, both competitively and professionally. Video cameras were not nearly as widely available in those days, so finding this material was definitely not easy. But the director, James Erskine, managed to pull all this together and compile this film, which is a very fitting tribute to really tremendous talent.
Why did you pick this film for this month?
Well, I saw it at a special screening myself last month, and again, as I say, it seems to be getting ready to be shown maybe a little bit more in the run up to the Winter Olympics in February. It shines a spotlight on someone whose contributions probably were kind of undervalued in many ways. But he definitely made an impact. And I think it's important that, his legacy and his contributions were recognized. Yeah. And this film does that very, very well.
And how does it differ from the final set? Like in terms of, the sport aspect of it, which did you prefer?
That's kind of an apples to oranges comparison, because one is a narrative feature and the other is a documentary.
Okay.
But probably the biggest difference between them is that the final set, you're dealing with somebody who's looking at making a comeback. And in the Ice King, you're seeing somebody who is going through a process of personal evolution and allowing his true talents and true abilities to come forth. And one of the other things I think that's really important to recognize about this film is the fact that because Curry was having some logistical and financial difficulties with his professional troupe after he finished competing, the staging of his performances was often difficult. So many times, some of these routines that he did, he was only really able to do once, or maybe a couple of times, but they weren't things that he was able to do on an ongoing basis. And one of the things that becomes apparent through the footage of watching these performances is you see him very much living in the moment. You can see him relishing the performance that he's giving at the time. And maybe on some level he knew that this may be a one-time thing, but at least while it's being presented, I'm going to make the most of it in this particular moment. And that's an important message, I think, for us as well, in the fact that so many times we're concerned with, well, I did it once, how many times can I do it? Well, does that really matter? I mean, it isn't the most important thing that you're really getting enjoyment out of doing it at the time while you're experiencing it, even if it never recurs.
Yeah.
And that was very, very kind of typical of the way Curry lived his life. So I think that's maybe a bit more of a subtle message, but nevertheless just as important for us as we watch it. And again, regardless of the venue in which you're doing it, whether you're doing it in sport or music or acting or writing or whatever, I mean, it's something that carries through into all of those different endeavors.
And how many stars?
4.5.
Oh,
yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is a really very well-made documentary.
That was the highest one that you gave today.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this one's available for streaming online.
Perfect. So. Okay. So let's hold on. Sorry, I'm going to switch screens here so we can share. We're just going to summarize.
Well, I've got a couple other things I wanted to
but let's just talk about okay, before we move it to there, let's just do the 4 movies again. So there was Shang-Chi. Yeah, and you gave that 4 stars.
4.
And then the Tammy Faye,
3.5 to 4.
3.5 to 4. And then there was the final set,
which is 4.
4. And then the Ice King, which is 4.5. Amazing. Yep. Okay, good. Okay, so those are the movies that you're going to talk about this month, but you did have some other things to talk about.
Yeah, I did. And one of the things that this is getting to be one of my busiest times of the year. It's film festival season. And I'm currently in the process of watching more movies than probably most people can count from film festivals, especially now that they're being made available to stream online. And I'm really very happy with that development. That's one of the pluses, I guess you could say, that's come out of the pandemic, is the fact that with film festivals, you previously had to attend in person if you wanted to see these things, which might not be easy if you're living in another city, or might not be Yeah, it might not be easy if you're living in a place where the venues are small and the tickets sell out really quickly. Now you have the ability with many of these festivals to be able to buy individual tickets or passes that allow you to stream these movies in your own home.
Amazing.
And I am so thankful for that, because it enables me to see a lot more movies that I might not other.
And me too, right? Because I'm not there. So you know, I agree. That's one of the silver linings of the pandemic, is that we're able to do things like this. Okay.
And the thing is, with many of these festivals, sometimes you might not get to see these movies any other way. Many of the filmmakers come to these festivals because they don't have a distributor. So they're shopping their films to see if they can find somebody who's willing to pick it up to put it into general distribution. And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Now, the thing is that you may end up missing some very good movies that don't get picked up.
Yeah.
And this is really the only way that you get to see them. So,
are you like listing them on your website, like of the film festivals and how we can stream it? Or
well, I've been on the Good Media website, Good Media Network website. I did have an item in one of the Movies with Meaning posts where I talked about how you can find out information about some of these festivals. On my own website, what I've been doing is, as I watch individual films, I put my summary reviews on what I call the quick cuts page, where you'll see the movie poster and a brief summary of what I watched and what I liked or didn't like about it. Now, I just last week, finished watching the Brooklyn Sci-Fi Film Festival, which was a little disappointing. A lot of the films kind of underwhelmed me, but I did see one called Light Ships, which I do recommend highly. It's a little kind of a strange film in some ways, but it's one that I do hope gets picked up because it's got some very interesting insights. Right now, I'm currently streaming the Reeling Film Festival, which is the Chicago International LGBTQ Film Festival. And this year, this is they've done a hybrid approach where it's available both in theater and for streaming. But the one thing that they've done with it this year is for many of the films, not all of them, but for many of them, they've made them available for streaming across the US. Now, that's, I believe, the first time they've ever done that. And I'm really very, very pleased to see them do that, because it's nice to have these films available on a local perspective, but have them on a national perspective is terrific. So I've seen a number of films in that one so far. It goes on through next week. Two that I recommend. One is called Down in Paris, and the other one is called At the End of Evan. So keep an eye out for those. They're worth seeing if you have the opportunity. And then starting October 14th, I'll be attending the Chicago International Film Festival, which is, I believe, the oldest competitive film festival in North America. It's their 57th year. And right now, I believe, I think I've signed up for 22 movies.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, something like that.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, 22 movies in about 12 days. So
wow, Brent, that's a lot. That's great. I can't wait for you to fill us in next month. That's awesome.
That is a lot of movies. That definitely is a lot of movies. And then in early November, the St. Louis Film Festival is coming up, which also streams regionally. So given that Missouri is right next to Illinois, I'm able to catch the films from that festival as well. So, and last year, I think I saw 20 movies from that one as well. So
good for you. Yeah. That's amazing.
Well, I really, I love it. I mean, it's a way to see a lot of really good cinema in a very concentrated time frame. And you're also able to, again, like I said, see things you might not get to see otherwise.
Absolutely. Will some of these be part of our November movie review?
Very likely.
Okay.
the one thing I'm always a little bit cautious about with talking about film festival movies at great length is I want to be careful not to get viewers' hopes up too high, because if they don't end up getting picked up,
Yeah.
they're very difficult to find.
Fair enough. Okay.
Yeah, so I'll be playing that by ear to see how that happens. But
Okay.
if nothing else, I will certainly be reviewing. I'll be doing wrap-up summaries of the festivals on my website.
Okay, good.
And I'll also be featuring some individual titles that I'll be doing longer reviews about.
Awesome. I was just going to ask you about that. So like, as you're going through these film festivals, you're going to be talking about them on your website. So, you know, our listeners, they can go to your website and find out what you're doing and what to see. Okay, that's awesome. Okay.
Now, the last thing I wanted to mention is also two interviews that our beloved host Frankie Picasso and I did.
Yes.
On FrankieSense's sister program, Mission Unstoppable. We did two interviews in September with filmmakers regarding really outstanding pieces of work that are coming out. The first one was on September 9th. We interviewed Patrick Salmon and Bennett Singer, who are the directors of a documentary called Cured that's going to be airing on PBS on October 11th, which is National Coming Out Day. Cured is the story of how the LGBTQ community in the early 70s successfully lobbied the American Psychiatric Association to eliminate homosexuality as one of their listed mental illnesses. And it's really shocking when you see the way gay people were treated in the time before that happened, because they were frequently institutionalized and subjected to things like electroshock therapy and lobotomies, castration. I mean, just any kinds of number of incredible, unbelievable indignities, because it was believed that those measures would help them overcome their quote unquote illness. This film chronicles the history of the effort made to eliminate that stigma, and the fact that they were able to do it as successfully and as quickly as they did. I mean, this was a lot of the work for it was accomplished in the course of only 4 years. And I was quite amazed that it happened that fast. I was thinking to myself, if only, things would move that quickly these days. But this is a very, very well-made film. It's rather short. It's only about an hour and 15 minutes, but it's very concise in terms of getting in, telling its story, and making clear what happened and how it happened. So the interview is available on Facebook Live, and it's also available on YouTube. So it's again, the movie is called Cured, and for those who want to see it on PBS, they'll be able to do so starting October 11th on the show called Independent Lens.
Awesome.
Now, the second one that Frankie and I did was also on Mission Unstoppable. It was an interview with Anthony Saldana, who is a filmmaker of a documentary called Straight Off the Canvas, which explores the work and lives of blind artists. Ooh. And yeah, it's really phenomenal to see the work that they're capable of producing, and just how inventive they are in terms of coming up with workarounds to be able to do things that most people would, theoretically think of as being virtually impossible.
Yeah.
This too is available on the Facebook Live page and on YouTube, and it's a fascinating interview. So I would say definitely tune into both of them. They're both very well done.
That's amazing. That one gave me chills, actually. I'd really like to see that one.
Yeah, it's the film itself, it's a little bit unclear exactly the future of its distribution, but the director was saying that what he's looking to do is to try and make it available to educational institutions and museums and nonprofits and things like that, where he believes he'll be able to get the most captive audiences for the subject matter. So I should also add too that this movie has been entered in 13 different competitions and won awards in 13 different competitions.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, that's
amazing.
That's quite an impressive track record to come up a winner in everything that you enter.
Oh, Oh, that's amazing. Oh, that's great. Great. I'm so happy that you talked about that.
Yeah, it's a good film.
Perfect. Nice. Okay.
So
So anything else that you want to add before we sign off here?
just keep watching my website to see
Yeah.
what else is coming up and what's going on. And
Absolutely.
we're also
BrentMarchant.com.
we're
Absolutely.
also we're also entering movie award season, so there's going to be a number
Yes.
of other new releases coming out over the next couple months. It's interesting that some of the movies that are playing at the Chicago Film Festival are going to be released in general distribution shortly after the festival ends. So you'll be able to see movies like Dune and Mothering Sunday, I believe is the name of it. It's an opportunity to see some of the things that maybe very well in line for contention for Oscars come next spring.
You always just got such big, great things to share with us, Brent. I love it. I love it. You get me so excited. I just want to spend so much time in movie theaters and in watching these fascinating pieces of art. And, just what you're sharing with us is just phenomenal. And I'm just
they really are wonderful. And I mean, they are my passion. And I really try to, stoke the enthusiasm of others to, go and see these wonderful pieces of art that, are more than just, silly cartoons and explosions. I mean, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that, but, I would like to hope that people would expand their vision a little bit more. And that's what I'm trying to help them do.
That's what you absolutely do that to me. And I'm just one person, and I know you do it to so many more. I'm just so thankful of our time together and spending this each month with you. I'm just so thankful. I'm so grateful that Frankie asked me to do this. And I look forward to seeing you in November.
Sounds good.
Thanks so much again for your time, Brent. Always a pleasure. BrentMarchant.com for everything that he's got going on. And thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Take care.
Bye.